Well, that's good.
All right, well, is it time? Are you ready, boss?
That clock's off.
All right. Good evening, everyone. It is 5 p.m. on Tuesday, July 9th, 2024, and I would like to call to order this special meeting of the joint session of the Millwood City Council and Millwood Planning Commission. Daniel, could you please call roll?
Jay Mulder. Here. Sean BC.
Here.
Sean Kohler.
Here.
Andy Van Hees.
Here.
Dan Sanders.
Here.
Kelly Stravens. Mike Ankeny.
Here.
Savannah Wu.
Here.
And Bill Rickard.
Here.
We have a quorum of the city council. Mr. Ankeny, do you wish to verify if you have a quorum of the commission?
Confirm that Commissioner Beasy is not here, and yes, we do have a quorum.
So there is a quorum of both bodies present. However, no action will be taken tonight. This is a special work session for our planner, Miss Amanda Tano, to discuss some of the recent developments in planning and zoning statewide that are brought to us by the Washington State Legislature, and then also give us an overview of the what the work she's been doing on the 2026 periodic update of the comprehensive plan and the land capacity analysis that is being done as part of that comp plan update. So at this point, I will turn this over to Ms. Tanya.
So while we're waiting for the presentation to load, I basically put this presentation together from sources from Washington State Department of Commerce, Growth Management Services, and other entities, as well as MRSC, based on ones I've attended recently via Zoom. And it is the most current information we have right now. But literally, as of yesterday, there's some additional updated guidance in draft form. And so I will talk how that integrates in with what I had. Oh, okay. Maybe just 1 minute. So since you guys have the hard copies in front of you, I'll go ahead and get started. So I think as most of you are aware, our comprehensive plan is due, as of right now, June 2026, with the development regulations specifically geared towards the new housing changes and stuff, due by December 2026. At this time, there is no extension offered. However, the 2024 and I believe 2025 deadline jurisdictions did get a 6-month extension, so that may occur with us, but at this time, these are the deadlines that we are looking at.
And that one.
So the first is gonna be an overview of the periodic update cycle. And next slide shows a map of the state of Washington, which outlines which jurisdictions are fully planning, partially planning, and when the deadlines are. And as stated, we are one of the gray jurisdictions, so it's Spokane County along with all the central counties. And it's all based on updating population size, growth rate, and other factors that place the local governments into the different categories. And previously, we had to do this every 8 years. After this cycle, it is now every 10 years. So, a little bit of good news there. Yes. That is it. All right. Okay, and go ahead and scroll down to the map slide. Whoop, just up a little bit. Right there, okay, so we just covered that. The next slide goes over what the requirements are for us for being fully planning. We're responsible, of course, for the amendments. So next slide down. There we go. For the amendments to the GMA, the Comprehensive Plan Development Regulations, urban growth areas, which luckily we're not going to be looking at that. Population projections, critical areas ordinance, and then the SEPA with best available science. Next slide. So going through what's required for the update, There are 3 checklists that I have to complete. The first one is on the comprehensive plan, the next one is on the development regulations, and the third one is on the critical areas ordinances. They're all lumped into one big grouping this time. And I basically have to go through each one of the sections and see where our plans and codes are in default of what is now in the legislature. Next slide. The next one is a picture of the Millwood Comprehensive Plan. And as you can see, other than historic preservation, we're basically looking at everything. We are also going to be adding in the first round of the schedule a new Parks and Recreation element that will ensure that Millwood is eligible for RCO grant funding for the park. I've completed a few of those, and this is my first one that'll be integrated into a comp plan, but RCO now allows for that, and so you're the perfect candidate to do it. And then the other addition will be working with Spokane County on the climate change and resiliency. Millwood is small enough, you're only required to have the climate resiliency portion, but that'll be a new element to your comprehensive plan. Next slide.
Remind me what RCO stands for.
Washington State Recreation and Conservation Office. They are the primary
Thank you.
coordination for grant funding. So the Planning Commission got a little snapshot of this schedule that was pretty unreadable last time, so I got that a whole lot corrected here. This is the draft work program that we're looking at, starting, of course, right now in July, August. End of July, we should have the work program and the public engagement plan going to Planning Commission for review and then on to council in August. Immediately following, we will be tackling the checklist that I mentioned for the plans and everything. Following that, the next one down the line will be the draft comprehensive plan, chapters 1 to 4, and updated community visioning, goals, policies, everything in that, plus the Parks and Recreation element. And that takes us into May of 2025, so that's all part of what we consider the first round of the grant funding. The next round goes into the remainder of the comprehensive plan for the remaining chapters, and then into the development regulations, which will be July 2026 through, spring of 2026, and hopefully concluded with everything by December of 2026 and adopted development regulations. Next slide. So there's been a lot of flux in the legislature since the original housing bills that I kind of introduced back in the spring took place. Those have now been refined some. So what we're looking at currently, and I will caveat this is currently, everything is in flux. And so things may be in flux all through the process. But right now, the ESHB 1998 co-living housing pretty much only applies to where we have the multifamily as of now. The parking standards where you can't require minimums, that applies to a lot of the portions of our code that we got to look at. Lammer does not apply for Millwood, nor does the net zero amendment procedures. The next column, ESHB 2321 middle housing clarifications. So when I introduced this back in the spring, we talked about the 6 of 9 rule, where you had to come up with 6 middle housing types at a tier 3 city. As of now, that is gone for tier 3. And so what we're looking at is essentially, on here I said 2 to 4, it's more likely going to be 2 to 3 now. And so this, I'm not gonna cover it all, but the handout that I provided is still in draft form, but it's some updates to the model ordinance that you can kind of look through, and I took snapshots out about the different housing types. The update deadline, as I said, at this time, the extension doesn't apply to Millwood, could in the future. Commercial adaptive reuse, limiting restrictions on the use of existing buildings for residential purposes in any zone where the multifamily is allowed. So if somebody comes in and purchases the Safeway, for example, and wants to adapt that to residential, if multifamily was allowed in that zone, we'd have to allow for that. And then public notice requirements, it just says you have to include a public comment deadline, which we always have on our stuff. Next one. So issues left on the table. One of the ones that I'm really watching for is dealing with the lot splitting. What the bill that originally had was that you had to allow short plats, even if they weren't going to meet your frontage requirements. And it was going to basically be piggybacked. So several of the lots here, we have the homes in the front and a big vacant area in the back. That bill was gonna address that, where we had to allow at least easements to have a lot in the rear. That bill got left on the table, didn't get passed at this time. Do I think it's gonna come back? Yes, in a different form at least. And so I'll continue to watch for that one. And then, other things that got left in the table was, neighborhood businesses and residential zones, and then certain SEPA categorical exemptions and notice provisions. The next one is covering housing specifically. And so we are required to conduct an inventory and analysis of our housing needs, and we have to do it by income, by permanent supportive housing and emergency housing. So this is where, under the new requirements, if we're allowed to use duplexes for our middle housing, for example, it may or may not meet the requirements in what I call the HAPT. And that is the Housing for All Planning Tool, and ours is gonna be for Spokane County. So I've already gotten a little preview of that, and our dwelling units that we have to accommodate for are 0.05% of the population, which I believe is about 49 dwelling units, have to be diversified amongst income brackets. So that's where I have to look pretty in-depth on how we're gonna meet that. And some of the policies that are already in the code, such as allowing multifamily by conditional use permit, I don't know whether or not that would meet that. So we have to look at those a little more. But that's step one of what I have to do on the housing element. Number two is identifying sufficient capacity of land for the identified housing needs. So this is the land capacity analysis that I'm currently in progress on. And I'm now about more than that. All I have left basically is the UR2 zone. I've looked at the UR1. There's a lot of underutilized. If you look at the letter of the guide where the land to home value ratio, there's a lot of underutilized. Whether or not that'll be taken into account, I don't know yet. But what I can confidently say is the city of Millwood can accommodate the required units as long as we can figure out how they play in with the income brackets. Yes.
You said a multiple, do you 0.043? I didn't.
0.05% of the county population is Millwood's. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep, I believe it's 49 units. And then number three, it's specifying the planning for and accommodating housing for all income brackets. And this goes into some of the policies for middle housing, that now it looks like it's gonna be more duplex for us than, fourplex. And then making adequate provisions for all the housing needs. So we have to document barriers to housing availability, such as gaps in funding, the development regulations, et cetera. And so I've got to go through and document that as part of the update process. And then finally, never had to do this before either, we have to address racially disparate income impacts, displacement, exclusion, displacement risk in housing through policies and regulations. I have not delved into that one very deep yet, so more info will come on that part. Next slide. So this was prepared by the Department of Commerce, and it goes over what is required in the state of Washington over the next 20 years. And we are short 1.1 million new housing units is what is needed statewide. And that's why we have all these new bills in front of us to accommodate for that. This also goes over the different income brackets that we have to plan for. So in the permanent supportive housing, which would be working with like Spokane Housing to have income limitation apartments or duplexes, those kinds of things. That's in the 0 to 30% AMI, and then the non-permanent supportive housing in the 0 to 30% AMI is about 220,000 units statewide. The next bracket, 30 to 50, and then going into smaller, going towards single family, you have your 50 to 80, your 80 to 120, and then your 120 plus AMI. I did a quick calculation when I talked with the mayor a few weeks ago, and I want to say in the 30 to 50, or sorry, the 0 to 30 range, was, what did we come up with, about $850 a month?
Yeah.
For rent? So no way to accommodate that without the permanent supportive housing, so we're gonna have to address some policies on that. And then the last part on the far right there is the emergency housing. And what that is housing for recently displaced families, homeless seniors, all the different demographic groups. And you've probably heard about the hotel ruling a few years ago. So, hotels do accommodate that. And so as long as we can update the code, to allow possibly for hotels and emergency housing in like the UR3 zone, I believe that'll meet the requirements, but I gotta look into it a little more. Next slide. So, when the presentation was done, they went over what was needed for each jurisdiction. So what I'm currently working with, and again, it's the HAPT, you'll hear that a few times. PTAC, the Planning Technical Advisory Committee that makes recommendations to the Steering Committee of Elected Officials. We're currently working through this right now. We were supposed to receive some updated guidance on July 5th from the state on what we're calling alternative method C, or they're calling a revised A. And it basically was trying to fit a happy median for between the little guys and the big guys. And it hasn't come out yet. So I don't have anything to report on that, unfortunately.
There's the workshop tomorrow for the steering committee of elected officials on that.
Yeah, so we'll see if maybe by tomorrow morning something's out, but the mayor may have more info by tomorrow than I do on that. And then, as we discussed, we have to accommodate allocations by income bracket. We have to document the programs and the actions needed to achieve the housing availability for each income bracket. This includes possibility of policy incentives, financial incentives. There's lots of options we're working through on the countywide planning policies right now. The mayor and I had an opportunity to review those and give comments back. And we agreed, as well as some of the other tier 3 cities, less prescriptive is better. And so that's the direction we're trying for right now, but it's still in draft form. And then updating everything to comply. Next one. So when DOC made this presentation, they kind of made the assumption that jurisdiction would find they don't have enough capacity. Because of the revisions to the tier 3 that are standing right now, I don't think that's going to be the case for Millwood. Things could change again. And then we don't have to worry so much about the infrastructure because we're not getting into as high a density that I thought we were going to have to. So we should be able to accommodate, but I'll be continuing to work with Matt and Kyle on that end of it. And then, like I said, we have to update the regulations for the emergency housing, permanent supportive housing, et cetera. Next. Okay, and this is where the fun part gets into. So we have 2 tracks that we have to comply with. The first tract are ADUs. This was put into law, I believe about 3-4 years ago. This one I was pretty confident on. I've done one of these ordinances. And basically we throw our ADU requirements out the window. This specifies what we have to do now. 2 ADUs per lot is how it is. You cannot require owner occupancy. You cannot prohibit sale as independent units, whether it be by condo or the new lot splitting type ideas. You must allow an ADU to be at least 1,000 square feet. So the ordinance I prepared, we just took the square footage requirements out and left it up to the lot coverage. And then you have to set consistent parking requirements if you're close to transit. And you cannot charge more than 50% of impact fees charged for the principal unit. This has to go into play by December 2026. The interesting part is the new guidance that came out, that's not adopted yet in draft, basically is saying if you're required to allow 2 ADUs, how does that work when now they're saying tier 3 cities only need 2 units per lot? So what I'm not sure on, and why I keep saying 2 or 3, is if you have a single family home, I believe you still have to require 2 ADUs. If you have a duplex on a lot, I do not believe you have to require the 2 ADUs. So that'll get a little more clarification as we go through the process. Next.
Question,
Yes.
how does that play into, and I think in our code, Kelly, help me with this, maybe if you remember this, where you have to have so much impervious,
The lot coverage.
the lot coverage.
Yes. Yes.
How does that play in?
So, some of the requirements are gonna reduce the lot coverages. But I'm trying to remember on the ADU one, if it throws it out or allows for it. I think it still allows for the lot coverage. I'll have to verify. It may be a little lower, but, somewhere between 40% and 60% is what we're looking at, I believe. So, these are just some graphics that were put together on different ADU types. ADUs are nothing new for Millwood. You already allow them. We've permitted several, actually. It's just going to be how they're done is what is gonna be slightly different. So as you well know, ADUs are allowed internally, externally, or completely detached, like the one we approved in the, above the shop recently. And the requirements are basically what I went over there, and let me see if it addresses the lot coverage. Size, dimensional standards. So, the third bullet down, dimensional standards, a local government may not impose setback requirements, lot coverage limits, tree retention mandates, or restrictions on any or on entry door locations that are more restrictive than those required for the principal use. Bingo. So whatever you require for single family can accommodate for ADUs as well. Yes?
You said, must include 2 ADUs, so you're saying if somebody asks, we must approve it? Is that what you mean, or that we must?
We must allow in our regulation updates 2 ADUs per lot.
And earlier, and I apologize, this is I'm not familiar with the commission's work, but, other than the recommendations, but, you talked earlier about easement, but because we're the tier 3 city, does that still hold, or do you say, no, now this new ADU thing, understanding just circumvents everything?
So before ADUs circumvented, with us being tier 3, there's a possibility that if we permit a duplex, that we may not have to allow more than the 2 units per lot. Because that is what our cap is. So the recent legislation that, or not legislation, guidance that came out in this attachment basically gives a little clarity that says we anticipate, since tier 3s are capped at 2 units per lot, well, then you shouldn't, if you have duplex, you shouldn't have to require the ADUs. But there's multiple ways of doing it, and so that's what we have to look at and see what fits Millwood the best.
Can I ask one last question? Because currently, right now, especially along the Riverway, the easement is what stops all this development of, oh, we're just gonna split every river property down the way like they do in Marengo. Is that gonna still hold?
Shoreline, so critical areas still hold.
Okay,
Yes.
that's what I'm curious.
But there's actually, in the UR1 zone, there is very, I think it was only 3 properties that actually had shoreline jurisdiction. It was very little. UR2, it's the whole section, and the UR3 apartment ones right off of Argonne there.
Thank you.
So the next slide. Whoop, there we go. So again, this was January's guidance. It is now being updated. So I'm going to go through this a little quicker than I was going to with the changes. So go ahead and go on to the next one. So what the model ordinance that was in place on June 6th basically said the city shall not require through development regulations any standards for middle housing that are more restrictive than those required for detached single-family residences, but may apply any objective development regulations that are required for the detached single-family residences. So in the UR1 zone, you treat duplexes and single-family the same rate. Our problem occurs in the UR2 and UR3, where you have different lot sizes for different uses. That's where we're gonna run into the issue, so those will have to be remedied. That's still in the code, or still in the legislation. G, the same development permit and environmental review processes shall apply to middle housing that apply to detached single-family residences. So, the conditional use permit requirement for multifamily, which is basically 3 or above, that one's questionable on whether or not that can still be in there. The other question is, do you want to keep saying multifamily, or do you want to divide it into like a triplex, a fourplex? And so that you have a little more flexibility in that. That's another option to look at. And then answering your question, the, unless otherwise required by state law, including limited to shoreline regulations, building codes, energy codes, electrical codes, et cetera. And then, the quote that's in there, that was actually pulled from a consultant study, back in the summer of 2023, I believe it was, that they called Millwood out as saying, we're one of the ones that can't require the larger lot sizes for duplexes in UR2 and UR3. I'm like, oh, that's fun. Applicability, so all these new housing standards apply to anything that is zoned predominantly for residential use. So UR1, UR2, UR3. It's all gonna come into this. It does not apply to the critical area designations, although we don't have much in the critical area outside of the shoreline jurisdiction. Go ahead and go to the next one. So unit density. So when we're talking about middle housing, you're talking about housing types and you're talking about housing density. So a housing type of duplex is gonna render you the 2 units per lot density. A housing type of single family is going to be 1. A triplex is gonna be 3. And so, that's just something to keep in mind when we're talking between housing types and unit density. But the newest, regulation update that came out for tier 3 cities is we are only gonna be required to have the 2 units per lot. Unless zoning permitting higher density applies. In the Millwood Code, what that comes into play right now is where you allow the conditional use permit for multifamily. That would be where it allows for the higher densities. Whether or not we could keep the CUP is to be found out. And then, they talk about it doesn't apply if you go below 1,000 square feet. I don't see that coming into play here. The new guidance, the 23-21, removed the 6 and 9 rule. And that makes a huge difference in how we plan in Millwood, because that was gonna be a big shakeup. And, again, it's 2 units per lot or 3 units per lot with 2 ADUs, to be determined if we can cap it the 2. I'm gonna go real quick through these. The purpose with these was when we were still looking a little more at the 6 per 9, but just for education background, what they consider small middle housing is basically duplexes, cottages, and triplex, fourplex, so anything up to 4 units. And the thing to remember when I'm looking at like the land capacity analysis is, even though we may not be able to go a duplex side to side, doesn't mean they can't add a second story to get a duplex top and bottom. And that's what they're calling duplex stacked. Next slide. So what they consider medium housing, which I was actually surprised, is townhomes are included in medium. This was a single family type use in Liberty Lake, but it's considered differently now under the new middle housing ordinances. So medium multiplexes, courtyard mediums, and townhouse mediums are all considered medium housing. And the development regulations, you have to include a definition for single family zones. The other thing you have to include a definition for is cottage housing and townhouses. And then next slide.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you have a 2-unit townhouse?
Yes, but under the missing middle, it's gonna be considered a duplex. Yeah.
So a townhouse is 3 units or more.
I believe, is that what they had on here, for the townhouse medium is 1 unit. It's based on how it sits in the lots and stuff. I actually have to look a little closer on this, because the difference I always understood between duplex and townhouse was a duplex were 2 units on 1 lot. A townhouse were duplex size possibly, but they were on individual lots. And I'm not sure how that plays in with their new definition for missing middle.
You'd have to allow for smaller lot sizes and 0 lot line setbacks.
Yes,
So-
and that's what Liberty Lake had.
So we under our current zoning do not allow for 0 setbacks, 0 lot lines. So we just by definition can't have townhouses. Also, we don't have minimum frontages small enough. Your typical minimum frontage on a townhouse is 25 foot.
Yeah, I think our townhouse lots were anywhere between 25 and 40, and if it was a corner, it would go up to 40, because then you had 15-foot side setbacks. All right, and large middle housing, we don't even necessarily need to be concerned with, so we can skip over that one. All right, so highlights for the code updates, kind of in summary here. You have to allow the permanent supportive housing and the step housing, the transitional housing and shelters. This is new for most jurisdictions. You need to look at bonus density for land owned by religious organizations. So if they want to put one of these shelters in, you're going to be looking at putting a shelter in. You may not regulate the number of people in a household. This is big more for Cheney in the college towns where you used to be able to cap. That's gone. Can't look at that anymore. You have to look at the limit on amount of parking that may be required near transit. I have to go through and look at all our different transit stops and whether they're classified as a high capacity type or just a regular bus. That makes a difference on what it is. If it's part of the system that goes straight to the hub and then straight back to downtown, that's classified differently than the regular bus. And then limits on regulating homeless encampments. Again, this is brand new out of the Supreme Court. That just got put back in. So it was thrown out, now it's put back in. Will it probably change again? Who knows? But as of the Supreme Court decision, you can now regulate them again. The parking changes, and then, again, for 2023, this was the previous presentation. 6 months after update, that still we have to do by December 2026 are the ADUs, our Tier 3 middle housing regulations. We shouldn't need to worry too much about the co-living. The unit lot subdivisions, what that specifically is, say you allow a duplex. You have to be able to, if it's a secondary, you have to be able to allow a unit lot subdivisions similarly to what Magnolia Village, for example. It's all on one lot right now, but they could be condoed or they could possibly fall under this new unit lot subdivision so that people can buy the individual units, but they're in part of a big association. The impact fees, which we don't have yet, the conversion of existing buildings that I covered, the clear objective design standards. I'm not sure how far yet this plays in, but possibly could go as far as looking at the signage standards on that and the special sign permit requirements. And then the permit timeline updates. Okay, and all of that, we still have to comply with the countywide planning policies too. Okay, I'm just gonna briefly cover the next section here. As I said, Millwood's required to do half of the new climate element, and it's the resiliency portion. We are going to be working with Spokane County, just like we are on the coordinated water system plan, to develop our resiliency element. And so I won't have to do a huge amount of legwork on this, but it is coming, it has to be included. Next portion. And for Spokane, no surprise, it's due in 2026. A lot of the other ones got extensions to 2029. We'll see if we do, I don't know. And then next one. So specifically what the resilience sub-element includes is at least one goal and a supporter policy for each hazard. So like extreme heat, anything relevant to the jurisdiction. So we're not gonna have to look so much at volcano eruptions over here, but we are gonna have to consider wildfire risk and extreme heat components and those things. A lot of this is gonna remind you of hazard mitigation planning, essentially, because they kind of go hand in hand. We have to address climate exacerbated natural hazards. We have to identify, protect, and enhance natural areas, and identify, protect, and enhance community resilience, including social, economic, and built environmental factors that support climate adaptation consistent with environmental justice. Easy, right? Yeah, and then we'll be working again with the coordinated water system plan. So, before I go on to the land capacity analysis updates, do we have any questions? This is a lot to digest, I know.
Will there be time at the end to ask questions about the overall? Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I told the mayor we'd stay within the hour, so that's why I'm going pretty quick, so we have room for questions.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So Brian, do you think there will be challenges to parts of this? Do you think that, what part do you think will be challenging?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you which part, there's, there might be. I don't know. Couldn't tell you which specific portion because the policies in different jurisdictions are really different, right? But I think, the way the legislature's rolled these out, I think it's gonna be a tough battle to overcome these legislative mandates. There's been, you can see a lot of, the legislative process can often be very rushed and hurried and a lot of things overlooked. There was a lot of focus and a lot of, the special interest groups that typically don't align were aligned on these. So, that's usually where you see the challenge is, the Association of Washington Businesses might challenge something, or Association of Washington Cities might challenge something. There was a lot of legislative alignment on these, so.
I think, oh, go.
Are these, Amanda, are these guidelines coming out of Commerce or?
Yes. So, this is just a snapshot of it, dealing just with a portion for that really affected Millwood. But, so this, House Bill 2321 updated the guidance from the previous model ordinance. And so these are the refinements. I'm not sure when it'll actually get adopted. If it's anything like the last one, it'll probably be winter, possibly. Yes, Commerce works with consultants a lot of times to put together these model ordinances.
So they're kind of in flux until they're finalized?
It is. What I can tell you right now, though, is for a fact, if we do not have something in place by December 2026, we will either be under the old model ordinance or the updated version or a future version. And if you look in the full model ordinances, there's a whole lot of stuff in there that is not bolded. So we gotta stay on track.
That might be where the legal challenges arise.
That's, yeah,
Not the
what I was
law, but
thinking.
rather the model ordinance or the regulatory process or the interpretation of the law itself. So, yeah.
Next one. So, in the overview, I kind of already touched a little bit on the land capacity analysis. Now I'm going to get a little deeper on it, specifically related to Millwood. So the snapshots on the left are the Spokane County land capacity analysis process steps that I have to follow. And basically I have to go through and look at every zone and look for vacant, partially used, and underutilized land. Once I finish all those zones, technically, I can also do them a little bit how I've been doing them, where I'm trying to look as I go to save time. But technically, step 2 is you subtract all parcels that the community defines as not developable because of physical limitations. We don't have a lot of hillside or anything, so that's not gonna be quite as play into here. The next is subtract the lands that are needed for public purposes. So if we were looking, if we had our own sewer water district, for example, and we knew we needed a new sewer treatment plant, we could designate approximately the size of the parcel we would need and say that's out. In our case, anything zoned for parks is obviously out. City Hall land is out. If we were knowing that we needed to expand City Hall and we were gonna have to go to another parcel, we would need to deduct land for that. The next is subtract the percentage of land that is assumed to not be available for development. In Spokane County, it's been decided that is approximately 30%. So once I come through, then I take 30% right off of that. Step 5 is after we determine the total capacity, we look at the desirable densities and land uses within each one of them, multiply that by the number of acres, and determine if we have the capacity. I can already tell you we do, based on the 49 approximately units. And then step 6 is doing the comparison of our population and our unit capacity against what the forecasts and everything are. The example I give on the right here is, this is an interesting one. So I've elected to do this as a hand count. And I heard from some of the other jurisdictions in our meeting today that are quite a bit bigger. They did it as initially a GIS count, and they are going down to the hand count level because of situations like this. The Spokane County assessor says that parcel is vacant land. Well, wait a minute, it has a shop built on it. Why are you calling it vacant land? Look at it, and technically, if it doesn't have a value of $5,000 or more, it is considered vacant. These are one of the things I have to take a look at. So they're saying that even though it has a shop on it, doesn't have a residence, and the shop is 60 years old and under the defined value, so it's vacant land. So if we're looking at that being vacant land, it's 11,310 square feet. It's in the UR3 zone. If you're allowing 1 dwelling unit per 2,500 square feet, it could possibly accommodate 4 dwelling units rounded down or 5 dwelling units rounded up under the current zoning. And we have to decide which way we want to go because it makes a difference on a lot of these. Okay, next one.
Question.
Yes.
I want to make sure I heard you right. So you're saying that the assessor says this 11,310 square foot lot is worth less than $5,000?
The improvement value, so the shop that's sitting on
The
it.
improvement.
And
Okay,
it's
that
interesting,
explains it.
so the improvement value, I believe, was 6,000, don't quote me on that. The policies say 5,000 or under, but the assessor determined it is vacant land. So these are the things I have to go through and look at individually, that now the bigger jurisdictions are having to do the same thing, even though they started out with a GIS model. And then I have to put all this into a report that we bring back and take it to Planning Technical Advisory Committee, on to Steering Committee of Elected Officials, and everybody has to agree on who's accommodating what. And it has to meet the HAPT. So that is the summary.
So the steering committee, actually, the 49 units isn't set in stone. We could,
The 49 is set in stone. How it's diversified amongst the income brackets is not yet.
and so we're obligated in my understanding, in the next 20 years to absorb the 49 units. There's no mandate for us to absorb more, so we don't need to necessarily.
Right now, no, based on how the HAPT lays out. But what we may have to do is change the densities because of the income bracket ratios, so that we can meet that requirement.
Do we know what that's gonna look like? I mean, have you even done preliminary on that?
Other than doing a quick analysis to say in 0 to 30, non-supportive housing was about an $850 rent value. So you're looking at lower income apartments. That was about as far as we've dealt with right now. Yeah, and then on the emergency housing side, looking at hotels and shelters and stuff.
Yeah, our biggest issue is we don't have that. We have a lot of single family in Millwood, and single family is 120 plus. So we do not meet those requirements, and it's gonna be interesting to see how we meet our missing middle of our housing.
Yeah, and even if we can meet the missing middle, we still have to meet the income bracket.
Yeah, sorry, my
requirements.
apologies.
That's actually the one that's
Yes.
the biggest, gonna be the biggest change now that the tier 3 guidance changed. And actually, the ADUs might be one of the best methods to meet some of the 50 to 80s is an ADU range typically, so.
The only issue with that is that doesn't tend toward home ownership.
Correct.
So-
It could under the new legislation, but currently didn't.
Correct. But not right now.
May I ask a question about this document?
Yes.
So last May, I championed and he introduced a resolution to bring us in alignment with the Spokane food policy. And as part of that, we were kind of committing to, we were going to look at how many chickens can you have on your yard? How many, different rules around that. Then, of course, we had Christina ended up leaving, and so we never did any of that evaluation. Could that be brought into alignment with this? Because I think that would be important to make sure we
Yes.
don't get too far without also considering
So,
that.
as we're going through, the goals and policies for the comprehensive plan, if you want to look at policies for, urban farms, for example, I think Millwood would be a great candidate for it, as long as you limit the roosters.
There are roosters. We just want more female fowl.
Yes. I can tell you firsthand experience, we had it in Liberty Lake on any of the lots which were few, that didn't have PUDs over the top. So basically the older section down closer to Sprague, as long as they were well taken care of and they didn't have roosters, they weren't an issue. The complaints came in is if they were not well taken care of, we'll just put it that way.
I don't have specific recommendations, but I do know as part of the Spokane Food Policy Council, Spokane Valley had just gone live with it. 3 years ago, Spokane, and the city of Spokane had gone live with some new revisions. And so I know there was some people's particularly from that side of Millwood that were saying, can we have some guidance and some relooking at this? Because we have right now very minimal language around any of this.
Yeah, and even, some of the jurisdictions were limiting, agriculture in general that even included little farms, and I'm gonna give an example. My kids go to, what we call farm camp. It's a little like 2-acre farm, over by the river, in the valley. And, it's great. They have, little corn, they have a greenhouse, they have, a miniature horse. It's fantastic to be able to integrate that in, and they grow all their own food, in there, and then teach the kids how to do it. So it's a really cool little side thing that incorporates in this, idea.
And I understand that the climate resilience is mostly about mitigation, risk mitigation planning, but I wonder if it can even also be tied into some of that.
I'll check on that.
Thank you.
So Amanda, that's the breadth of your presentation. So I guess I would open this up to all members present tonight. If you have questions about how this is anything that you might have questions on technically or the duration of the process, I will say to our planning commission members, we will appreciate your service during this time.
And it's gonna be fast. I believe it's gonna be a faster process than you've done before.
Saddle up, guys. We've been through this before.
Yeah, the biggest thing I can say on this is, unless there's legal challenge for it, we have a drop dead timeframe. We have grant requirements we have to meet. And so this schedule here, we gotta stay right on it. If it says number 8 is from May 2025 to September, October 2025, that means deliverable number 8 has got to be submitted by October 2025. And then even more so, the development regulations by December 2026. So it'll be a tight schedule.
Well, as I mentioned at the last planning commission meeting, and Kelly, you were chairman at the time, we just did a real huge deep dive into our growth management plan and all that stuff, so I think the big thing is gonna be just the new regulations that we have to put into it, is gonna be the deep dive into it, so.
I can say from sitting at the steering committee of elected officials, it is, if we're required to take 49 units, or required to have 49 units, we're not gonna be able to say, well, we can't, because our lots are too big, our lots are too small, or our lot size. The county is adamant that everybody is going to take their fair share this time around, because the county does not want to have all the burden other than City of Spokane placed on them, because that's infrastructure build out, capital facilities, everything like that, that they're looking at areas particularly like Millwood, Airway Heights, Cheney, Liberty Lake, that have full-on infrastructure already in place where densification is easier than expansion.
So the rural nature can be historically Millwood, preserved where can, but for the most part, Millwood going forward wouldn't have the rural character.
So I own a house also on Argonne, I don't live there, and they're all on acre lots for right now. And Spokane County promotes it by, oh, well, we're gonna do this density, but there's different ways to approach density. If you say, oh, an acre lot needs to be four separate lots, and then the owner stays on that lot and then lives amongst the people that are occupying the other three, I guarantee you that piece of land gets treated very differently than someone who just washes their hands of an acre, walks away and says, build whatever you want. So I mean, I think that, yes, that's well taken, we can't push back on this, but there is different ways that you can develop land.
And actually, what I found in an interesting tidbit was specifically on the UR1 zone, the lots that were the smaller lots that had duplexes built, let's say, late 90s and forward, had some of the highest land values, even though they were the smallest lots, non-conforming lots, actually, had some of the highest land values in the UR1 zone compared to the huge lots with just the single-family residence on it.
Mr. Sanders?
So there's a difference between ownership and residency. And from what you had said, ownership is kind of is a goal along the road rather than just the residency.
Commerce appears to be prioritizing the opportunity for people to own homes and own homes at different income levels. So, single-family home ownership, while a goal is, I think, recognized by commerce as for a number of individuals, a significant, maybe even majority of individuals, unattainable in current economic climates. So the idea of loading up on single family is, that's not something that you can't develop your way out by going single family.
With auxiliary.
With ADUs, because I think
Family or rental or.
you're gonna have to balance it, because then you're strung, that person doesn't own that ADU. So it's still, yes, this person owns the adjacent ADU, but the individual within that ADU, be it family member or you've made that and it's a rental for you, that person doesn't own that. It could be short-term housing, but it's not leading toward home ownership. Commerce has, that housing for all planning tool is very interesting in how they go about setting the income levels and setting the needs of the brackets of housing based on those income levels. And it does appear to prioritize home ownership at all income levels, or have opportunities for home ownership at all income levels. Whether or not that's the actual case, but the idea is supposed to be there that if you can't afford a single family home, maybe you can afford a townhome, or maybe you can afford half of a duplex or something like that. So that's just what it appears to be.
Well, somewhere along the road as some of those either duplexes become two different ownerships, or parcel has two different ownerships with, some type of access, that we need to take that and build that into our water and sewer ordinances, because if it's a separate ownership, then it probably needs a separate water meter and sewer connection.
And it does.
Rather than, if it's a duplex, you could have one. Very good. But we need to, that's only the beginning step, I guess I'm saying.
Historically, Millwood does not prefer or does not allow flag stick lots, which is what we're talking about, which is house in front, house in back. Primarily because there is the infrastructure issue with that road and who's gonna maintain that road and things like that. On a two-person flag stick lot, that's one thing. When you have something where you have a narrow corridor and then you have homes stacked, so it's kind of like an E or something like that, that becomes an issue because who maintains that road? We don't have HOA. HOAs tend to fall apart, and it has to do with how do you provide infrastructure to that? Who's going to maintain that infrastructure? All that stuff. So we have much more prioritized as a city. We much more prioritize subdivision and short platting and development that way. And I think that's important for the planning commission at this time because I think given the change in the theory of what we're trying to do for housing, I think anything is on the table at this point. I think any good idea for how we address these issues is on the table. I don't think that we can dig in and go, well, we did it that way 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and that's the way we keep doing it. We're talking about not just more people, because that would be something I think what you would see is people would be fighting against that. Are you just trying to shove everybody within the UGA? What we're talking about is more income, more housing opportunities for various income types. And that is a fundamental change in the philosophy of how we're looking for jurisdictions to provide housing to its citizens. So don't shy away from any good idea while you're doing this.
And in the model ordinance, the parts that aren't bolded, there's actually some good ideas in there for design standards and stuff. And so I know Millwood has some of that intact already, and so there may be some of that we can draw out. If you didn't want the whole model ordinance, you can still draw out some of the more innovative design features and stuff.
I would say the more aggressive probably isn't the right word, but the more embracing we are. Sometimes I would think that did we meet the spirit of the law as opposed to the letter of the law as things change going forward? Perhaps we do enough now that if the legislation changes going forward in the future and requires more stringent or more prescriptive methods, we've done enough. I don't think the minimum is something we should shoot for. We don't necessarily have to do the maximum because that's not necessarily in the character of the city. But I don't think you want to phone this one in. So, just advice. I don't envy you folks. You got a lot of work, and so it's much appreciated.
There has to be a solution, because I'd like our kids to be able to live in Millwood if they choose to, and right now, the way things are going, they're not going to be able to afford to buy single-family dwellings in the next 10 to 15 years.
I'm constantly amazed at what a house goes for. Constantly. I'm becoming my parents. Parent.
Did I see in the presentation that minimum size of an ADU was 1,000 square feet?
Yes, you have to allow, so you can't have any more that limits it to like 300 or whatever.
Okay.
That's why 1,000 square feet, it became negligible.
Yeah.
So in the last ordinance I did, we just didn't put a square footage requirement in there. We left it up to lot coverage because it became kind of silly.
Now there are,
Because the reason I asked that is, to me, maybe a solution, bad idea, good idea, whatever, tiny home,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
If you're looking at the $850 a month price point,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
know, you're gonna be into a 300 square foot home.
So that's the tiny homes and cottages, they're looking at in the middle housing, yeah.
And then are the building setbacks, are they on the table also?
I believe for the most part, they can stay as is. There were a few exceptions to that. There's reductions for ADUs. I believe there was no side or rear setback for ADUs. And then there was a few other changes, but for the most part, I believe the traditional setbacks can stay.
Or must they stay?
Must they stay? Well, you either, on the building code side, you either have to meet at least the building code setbacks, or you have to have zero lot line style development for fire code. So you have to have something, but, if you wanted to go the direction of zero lot line, then you specify in compliance with building codes.
Well, I was thinking perhaps if we're talking about the mayor's flag, that rear property line may not need to have that 5 foot, whatever that setback is.
Oh, between the units, correct, that's one method is, if you have a rear lot, and so say you have a driveway access easement, so it wouldn't be a road, it'd be an access easement. And, you have the rear lot, you could waive the front setback requirement, since the front unit already has a 15 or 25 foot rear or whatever. And then, they could accommodate a rear garage or something like that, so yeah, there's lots of flexibility.
Some flexibility there.
I think actually some of that is in the middle housing, model ordinance.
So it is 6:01, and so I would ask the group here, do you wish to continue discussions with Amanda? If we do, we would adjourn this special meeting and then open the regular meeting and continue the special meeting, or continue discussion, continue the workshop into the regular meeting? What do we do, Counselor?
We would adjourn the city council meeting and open the regular city council meeting, but we would continue the planning commission meeting. Boom.
That's what we pay for. Or if we're done and everybody's brain is full, we may adjourn. Well, I will leave it to you folks.
I thought that was an excellent.
We need to adjourn anyway.
Yeah, we need to adjourn.
So I move to adjourn the special meeting for the planning commission and joint, city council meeting.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The city council meeting is adjourned. Now, Mr.
Adjourn the planning commission meeting. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make that motion, Mike.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second that motion.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Meeting adjourned.
All right, thank you very much. So we will take briefly